Welcome to Shakil 5858 War and Peace Reports. I am Amir Woodnam. 700 GMT, March 1st, 2024. More than 100 people killed trying to getting the groceries from the truck convoy in Gaza. On Texas-Mexican border, Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden 300 miles apart, visiting places, pointing out their agenda. Frozen embryo, a big case in Supreme Court. 30,000 milestone in Gaza. Texas Panhandle wildfires are spreading. They cover now Rhode Island area. Trump case of January 6 riots. U.S. government shutdown. Putin threat of nuclear war after a statement by French President Macron. Defense Secretary Austin disappearance. Smart cards of China are banned. Wall Street goes high. I am thankful to all news resources. Now the news in detail.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Authorities in Gaza say Israeli forces have committed a massacre in Gaza City, killing at least 104 Palestinians as they waited for food aid. Gaza's health ministry says over 760 people were wounded in what Hamas called an unprecedented war crime. According to eyewitnesses, Israeli forces opened fire on the crowd that had gathered around humanitarian aid trucks. The death toll is expected to rise as hospitals in Gaza City are struggling to treat the wounded. Dr. Jadala Al-Shafai of Al-Shifa Hospital spoke to Al Jazeera shortly after the attack.
Since the early hours of the morning, the hospital has been flooded with dozens of dead bodies and hundreds of injured. The majority of the victims suffered gunshot wounds and shrapnel in the head and upper parts of their bodies. They were hit by direct artillery shelling, drone missiles, and gunfire. All our operation rooms are full, and all medical staff have been deployed. Above all, we ran out of medical supplies and fuel necessary to operate the hospital. We hope we will be able to provide any life-saving procedures to those victims. All victims are in critical condition and lying on the floor. We stand helpless amid the sharp shortage of supplies and staff.
This comes as Palestinian officials say the death toll in Gaza since October 7th has topped 30,000. The staggering milestone, which does not account for thousands still missing or trapped under rubble, represents 1 out of every 75 people in Gaza. The UN says over 500,000 people in Gaza are on the cusp of starvation. The Gaza Health Ministry reports 6 children recently died from dehydration and malnutrition. 7 other children are in critical condition. After headlines, we'll speak with Oregon's Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley. He recently visited the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing. Here in New York, activists are observing a 24-hour vigil in front of City Hall. Participants are reading the names of the 30,000 Palestinians killed since October 7th. A number of city council members have appeared at the vigil since it kicked off Wednesday amidst an effort to pass a ceasefire resolution in New York City. Audrey Sasson, director of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, spoke yesterday.
You do not have to be Arab, Muslim, Palestinian, or in my case, in the case of our members, Jews who say no, to speak out against an unfolding genocide. That's right. You simply need to be a human being who's paying attention.
In Missouri, a Girl Scout troop has split from the organization after the group made legal threats against the girls for running a fundraiser benefiting Palestinian children. Girl Scout mother Nawal Abu Hamda said that instead of selling cookies this year, her 10-year-old daughter and sister troop members decided to make and sell bracelets with beads in the colors of the Palestinian flag, spelling out Gaza and Palestine. The Girl Scouts of Eastern Missouri deemed the move political, banning them from continuing their fundraiser for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. In response, the girls decided to part ways with the Girl Scouts organization. They're continuing their fundraiser, which has raised over $10,000 so far. Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell announced he's stepping down as Senate's Republican leader in November in a move that's expected to strengthen Donald Trump's control of the Republican Party. The 82-year-old McConnell has served 17 years as Republican leader, the longest term in Senate history.
Believe me, I know the politics within my party at this particular moment in time. I have many faults. Misunderstanding politics is not one of them.
Senator McConnell said he plans to finish his term as senator. During his leadership, Mitch McConnell successfully blocked voting on Democratic bills from gun control to election integrity while ramming through Republican priorities, including Trump's $2 trillion tax cuts for corporations and the wealthiest Americans. Mitch McConnell helped Trump stack federal courts with far-right judges. He also reversed the 60-vote threshold for confirming Supreme Court justices, allowing Trump to install 3 right-wing ideologues on the bench a few years after stonewalling President Obama's Supreme Court justice pick. Former Labor Secretary Robert Reich said of McConnell, quote, "Few people have done more to undermine our democratic institutions and the rule of law than Mitch McConnell," Reich said. The Supreme Court's announced it'll decide whether former President Donald Trump has presidential immunity and cannot be prosecuted for attempting to overturn the 2020 election. Oral arguments will be held during the week of April 22nd. Trump's claimed he should have total immunity from prosecution. The court's decision is seen as a major victory for Trump, as it'll likely further delay his federal election subversion trial until possibly after the November election. Meanwhile, a judge in Illinois has ruled Trump should be removed from the state's March 19th primary ballot for violating the insurrectionist clause of the 14th Amendment. The judge stayed her ruling until Friday, giving Trump a chance to appeal. Colorado and Maine have also ruled Trump to be ineligible. The Supreme Court heard arguments in the Colorado case 3 weeks ago, but hasn't issued a decision yet. In other Trump news, the New York Times has revealed the former president has paid out nearly $400,000 to cover legal expenses from his failed lawsuit against the newspaper. Trump sued the Times after it revealed his confidential tax record showed he paid very little in federal income tax. This all comes as Trump and President Biden are both making separate trips today to the U.S.-Mexico border. Biden is headed to Brownsville, Texas, while Trump is going to Eagle Pass, Texas, which has been the center of a standoff between the state of Texas and the federal government. In other election news, Marianne Williamson has unsuspended her presidential campaign after she received about 3% of the vote in Michigan's Democratic primary against Biden. Williamson's the only Democratic candidate to support a ceasefire in Gaza. In other Supreme Court news, justices appear divided along ideological lines as they considered Wednesday whether the Trump administration overreached its authority when it imposed a ban on bump stocks in 2018. Bump stocks can turn semi-automatic rifles into fully automatic machine guns and were used in the 2017 Las Vegas mass shooting, which killed 60 people and injured hundreds. A decision is expected in the summer. Congressional leaders announced a deal Wednesday to briefly extend government funding, avoiding a partial shutdown. The deal, which both the Senate and House must vote on before Friday deadline, would fund 6 federal agencies through March 8th and another 6 through March 22nd. In the Texas Panhandle, the massive Smokehouse Creek fire has now burned nearly 900,000 acres of land, making it the second largest wildfire in Texas history. The fire is now larger than the state of Rhode Island. At least 1 person and thousands of cattle have died in the blaze, which was sparked by record heat. Residents say the fire quickly swept through whole neighborhoods.
It came up very fast. I saw the neighbor's house starting to burn, and I called 911, and the fire trucks got here, but it just started really fast. Flames were everywhere. time we got back, well, there was nothing left. We basically have lost everything. This is the only pair of pants I've got, and the shirt. That's it.
4 other large fires are also burning in Texas. In other news from Texas, prison officials executed 50-year-old Dallas native Ivan Abner Cantu on Wednesday, despite major doubts over his conviction in a high-profile campaign to save him. A key witness recanted their testimony in the 2000 double homicide, which killed Cantu's cousin and his cousin's fiancée, and over which Cantu had always maintained his innocence. Among those who called for a stay in Cantu's execution were jurors from his trial, Democratic Congress members, celebrities, and Catholic activists. Texas medical officials injected Cantu with pentobarbital at 6:26 p.m. He died 21 minutes later. In other execution news, Idaho prison officials had to call off the execution Wednesday of Thomas Eugene Creech after failing to establish IV lines. The all-volunteer medical team attempted to find a viable vein for the lethal injection for nearly an hour, trying 8 different sites on his body. The execution was scheduled to be Idaho's first in 12 years. In Guinea, trade unions have suspended their nationwide strike after union leader Sekou Jamal Pendesso was released from prison Wednesday. The strike had gripped the West African nation since it started earlier this week. 2 young protesters were killed Monday after clashes with police. The labor-led protest came after Guinea's military, which overthrew President Alpha Conde in a 2021 coup, unexpectedly dissolved the transitional government that had been in place since 2022. Unions accused leaders of cracking down on dissent and censoring the media.
Alpha Conde had problems with the press, but what Junta leader Mamadi Doumbouya has done today is worse, because Doumbouya even went as far as to cut off the internet in Guinea for more than a month. Alpha Conde never did that.
In Nigeria, government workers and other sectors have launched a new nationwide strike amidst growing protests over the soaring cost of living and inflation. Labor leaders say President Bola Tinubu is failing to deliver on campaign promises of wage increases and financial help for the poorest households. The International Criminal Court has awarded victims of Uganda's Lord's Resistance Army, Commander Dominic Ongwen, more than $56 million in compensation. Although the sum is a record for the ICC, it amounts to a symbolic $812 for the more than 50,000 eligible survivors. The tribunal's trust fund for victims is expected to pay out the money. Survivors reacted to the verdict Wednesday.
Me personally, I'm not happy. The order is unfair because if they're paying us 750, that's around 3 million Ugandan money. That is really little money. Like for example, for me, I was shot. My hand, I've lost my arm. I can't do any heavy work. So that money can't even buy me land. It can't even repair what I lost in my life. Dominic Ongwen, once a child soldier himself, eventually became one of the LRA's top commanders. He was sentenced in 2021 to 25 years and 60 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity, including rape, murder, and child abduction. Back in the United States, Republicans blocked a bill that would create federal protections for in vitro fertilization. Senator Tammy Duckworth, who had both her daughters using IVF, brought the measure to the floor in the wake of Alabama's Supreme Court ruling that frozen embryos are children. Duckworth sought to pass the bill under unanimous consent, but Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith blocked it, citing vast overreach. Meanwhile, Alabama Republicans have advanced several bills to protect IVF in the state, which could pass as early as next week. And the Justice Department has launched its investigation into Boeing after a door blew off an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9 mid-flight last month. This comes as the Federal Aviation Administration gave the company a 90-day deadline for presenting a safety plan that meets current standards for new planes. A recent report by the FAA found Boeing's safety culture to be inadequate and confusing. Last week, Boeing announced it was replacing the head of its 737 MAX program. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.
Tributes to former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, who died today, his profound influence on the country. Also on this Thursday night, for-profit group homes accused of targeting Indigenous children to make more money.
They were legitimately a paycheck.
The alarming claims in a global news investigation. A stampede of the starving. Israel accused of shooting civilians rushing to an aid convoy. Newly released mysterious audio. The banging sounds from the doomed Titan submersible that gave hope the crew was alive. And there's no sugarcoating this sour experience.
Absolutely so.
The weak Willy Wonka-themed event police were called to.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is breaking news tonight about Brian Mulroney, a man who served as Canada's 18th Prime Minister. His daughter, Caroline Mulroney, announced today that he died peacefully, surrounded by family. Reaction is coming in from across party lines. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeting, Brian Mulroney loved Canada. I'm devastated to learn of his passing. He never stopped working for Canadians and he always sought to make this country an even better place to call home. We will have more reaction in just a moment, but first Eric Sorensen looks at the life of a proud Quebecer from Baie-Comeau and a lifelong Conservative.
A brand new day for this wonderful Canada.
He reached the highest heights and the deepest depths in politics.
Sad day for Canada.
But Brian Mulroney's impact on this country was profound. As a teenager, Mulroney met and was impressed with Prime Minister John Diefenbaker. Charming and ambitious, Mulroney's first political run was for the job Dief once held, the Progressive Conservative leadership. He lost to a young MP, Joe Clark.
A victory for all of us.
Clark was elected Prime Minister, but lost the job after 9 months back to Pierre Trudeau. Mulroney, with a second chance, seized the Tory leadership from Clark.
Brian Mulroney, 1,584.
And in the next election, made short work of Liberal leader John Turner.
This is wrong for Canada.
Scoring a debate knockout over political appointments.
You had an option, sir, to say no, and you chose to say yes to the old attitudes and the old stories of the Liberal Party. That, sir, if I may say respectfully, that is not good enough for Canadians.
A sweeping year-long investigation by Global News has uncovered startling allegations that for-profit companies that operate group homes in Ontario's child welfare system may be targeting Indigenous kids to make more money. Our analysis also found Northern Children's Aid Societies serving communities with the fewest resources were charged the most to have their children in those group homes. As our chief investigative correspondent Carolyn Jarvis reports, the impact on Indigenous kids moved far from home can be traumatic and lasting.
The people you're about to hear from are blowing the whistle on how Indigenous kids are being treated by Ontario's child welfare system. The way that they used those kids as cash cows. They were legitimately a paycheck. Indigenous youth are being monetized. Global News spoke with more than 50 child welfare insiders who said they believe some for-profit group home companies in Ontario are targeting, or in some cases even charging more to care for Indigenous kids. We've agreed to conceal their identities because they fear reprisal.
It was all money. It was never ever about the youth. It was always about money.
Group homes are supposed to be safe havens for kids and teens who may have come from abuse or have complex needs. In Ontario, more than 40% are operated by for-profit companies.
Child welfare isn't child and family services. It's the consumption of children as assets because it brings the money.
It's Children's Aid societies that place youth in group homes. A select few run their own, but most turn to outside operators. And as we uncovered, some agencies are charged more than others, with the highest daily rates billed to one group, Indigenous Children's Aid Societies in the North.
It was about we need to recruit youth from up north.
What was the talk? That we are aware that these youth can be difficult to place because of the limited resources in their communities. So they're willing to increase the cost of the contract because they have limited options. An exclusive analysis by Global News of how much Children's Aid Societies in Ontario spent on group homes run by outside operators found that on average, Indigenous agencies in the North paid 26% more per child per day compared to non-Indigenous agencies across the province between 2012 and 2021. That translates to an estimate of nearly $28 million more over a decade.
It's no different than the process of residential schools. They're taking it away from their families. They're taking it away from their culture. They're taking it away from their language. Non-Indigenous people are making money on the backs of these children.
Megan Taylor was one of those children, moved nearly 2,000 kilometers south.
It's very scary too. It's like you're moving on a different planet.
Every child placed in a for-profit group home comes with a contract, some worth over $1,000 a day per child. But what they received for that money varied greatly, according to former workers. Some homes offered support, others were punitive and cold and devoid of culture.
You weren't allowed to talk in your tongue. Staff would get mad, send you to your room, restrain you.
The result, experts say, it's kids who pay the price.
The system needs to know it's failing.
The group homes we investigated all say they are not targeting or charging more for Indigenous youth and reject any comparison to residential schools. They say they work with a team of professionals and a child's guardian to ensure their cultural needs are met. Donna?
Carolyn Jarvis in Toronto, thanks. You can watch the full investigation in a special one-hour edition of The New Reality, The Business of Indigenous Children in Care, airs Friday night on Global. The dire situation in Gaza, where people are on the brink of starvation, got much worse today. According to witnesses, Israeli forces opened fire on people rushing to get aid coming in on trucks. A warning, the images are disturbing. Officials in Gaza say more than 100 people were killed, hundreds more injured in Gaza City. They accuse Israeli soldiers of shooting into crowds of civilians trying to reach a convoy of humanitarian aid. Israel says their troops did open fire, but that most of the dead were crushed, trampled, or run over by the trucks as people rushed to get close. The death toll was already staggering. Gaza's health ministry, backed by Hamas, now says more than 30,000 Gazans have died in Israel's siege. Redmond Shannon on the reaction to what Israel's critics say is slaughter and starvation in Gaza.
Dawn breaks over northern Gaza, revealing the aftermath of yet another horror. The dead and the injured dragged and carried from the scene to hospitals that barely function. This man and other witnesses say Israeli tanks fired on crowds that gathered before sunrise to get food from aid trucks. Hamas says Israeli forces killed over 100 people.
No IDF strike was conducted towards the aid convoy.
An Israeli military spokesperson said Gazans ambushed an aid convoy run by a private contractor.
Some began violently pushing and even trampling other Gazans to death, looting the humanitarian supplies.
Israel says its troops only fired directly at those who ignored warning shots and approached Israeli tanks. Whatever the circumstances, the desperation among a population under siege is clear from Israeli drones above. The United Nations says it has not been able to deliver aid to northern Gaza in a week, an area where 300,000 people still live.
In northern Gaza, where the operational space for humanitarian work is now almost zero, many are already believed to be starving.
US President Joe Biden said the deaths would complicate ongoing peace talks. Elsewhere in Washington, the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says he believes that the number of women and children killed by Israel in Gaza since October 7th is over 25,000. That suggests the total number of deaths could be far higher than the Hamas figure of 30,000. Donna?
Redmond Shannon in London, thank you. Israel has barred entry of food, water, medicine, and other supplies, except for a trickle entering at the Rafah crossing and Israel's Karim Shalom crossing. Airdropping aid is the other option. Several countries have already done it with the help of the Jordanian Air Force. And now the Canadian government says it too hopes to airdrop humanitarian aid into Gaza in the coming days. Canada's International Development Minister recently traveled to the region and says the provision of aid to civilians is nowhere near what's needed. Preparations are underway for Alexei Navalny's funeral in Moscow tomorrow, and colleagues of the Russian opposition leader say they can't find a hearse to carry his body. They say mortuaries are getting phone calls threatening them if they agree to transport Navalny's body. They also accuse Russian officials of blocking a larger memorial service. Today, police were seen near the church and the cemetery where tomorrow's ceremony is planned. Navalny's supporters are promising to live stream it. The 47-year-old died in a Russian penal colony. His supporters blame Russian President Vladimir Putin. It's been more than 8 months since the Titan submersible imploded. Coming up for the first time, we hear the sounds that gave searchers hope. As of late tonight, Mexicans coming to Canada will need a visa to get in. The federal government is reimposing visa requirements that it lifted nearly 8 years ago because there's been a flood of asylum claims from Mexicans. Taria Isri explains the about face.
Mexican travelers were given less than 24 hours notice that visa-free travel to Canada is ending. Immigration Minister Mark Miller announced the swift reversal.
We want to make sure that people don't game the system. It has to come into effect quite quickly.
The Liberals are bringing back the visa requirement they dropped in 2016. That year, there were 260 asylum claims from Mexico to Canada. Since then, that number has reached a record high, surging to almost 24,000 last year.
Most asylum claims from Mexico are either rejected by the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada or withdrawn or abandoned by the applicant. And so a change was needed.
Quebec, the main destination of Mexican asylum seekers, urged Ottawa to do this. Premier François Legault called it the right step, but asked, what do we do with the 160,000 asylum seekers we already have?
You should have a visa with Mexico.
The Harper government introduced the visa requirement for Mexicans in 2009. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says it should have stayed in place.
We have the social services and our housing market completely overwhelmed with false claimants.
The Biden administration had warned human traffickers connected to Mexican cartels may be exploiting Canada's visa-free system as a backdoor to get into the U.S. The Mexican president is accusing Washington and Ottawa of acting unilaterally on immigration and is threatening to skip the upcoming Three Amigos Summit, which Canada is hosting this year. Taria Isri, Global News, Ottawa.
A sweeping police crackdown on organized crime in Quebec has led to more than 30 arrests in the last week, and more are expected. Authorities say it's a blow to the Blood Family Mafia, a street gang believed to be behind a string of violent kidnappings. Mike Armstrong is in Quebec City with what police have revealed. Mike.
Well, Donna, these are charge sheets for some of the people arrested over the last week in this region. Almost all of them members of the same street gang. Now, police are hesitant to talk about the Blood Family Mafia specifically, but at a press conference at provincial police headquarters this morning, they did make it clear why they deployed hundreds of officers in recent days and raided 40 different locations.
Well, a lot of these arrests are linked directly to the events that happened last week.
There were two very violent incidents. One was at this home south of Quebec City. 3 men with links to the Hells Angels were kidnapped and tortured. tortured. The other incident was also the kidnapping of a man with links to the Hells. He was dropped off in the streets of Montreal after being tortured and mutilated. According to sources, the BFM gang is led by Dave Surmel. He's gone after the Hells after refusing to pay a 10% tax on drug sales in Hells-controlled territory. Surmel is believed to be right now hiding out in Europe.
The suspects that we're looking for that are not in Quebec, we're working with different authorities. I'm not going to go into too much detail.
Again, according to sources, the Hells used back channels to tell police they should take action against the BFM gang or things could get even uglier. Police insist they're not working with or supporting the Hells. They say it just happens that in these cases, it's people linked to the Hells Angels who are the victims. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Quebec City.
Quebec's Court of Appeal has upheld the province's controversial Bill 21 in its entirety, a decision that quashes a legal challenge over its constitutionality and its protection through the notwithstanding clause.
It's a great victory for all of those who support a secular Quebec. It's especially a victory for Quebec's liberty, Quebec's autonomy.
The ruling also granted the province's appeal to overturn a lower court's decision exempting English school boards from the secularism law. Bill 21 prohibits public sector workers such as teachers, judges, and police officers from wearing religious symbols on the job. Opponents say the law disproportionately targets and discriminates against Muslim women. Canada's long-awaited national pharmacare bill was tabled in Ottawa today. Diabetes treatments and contraception will be covered to start. There are plans to eventually develop a universal single-payer system for other medications. It's meant to give Canadians better and cheaper access to medicine. Eric Sorensen reports on the work Ottawa and the provinces and territories must do to implement the program and get this legislation passed.
For up to 9 million women and gender-diverse Canadians, cost has always represented a barrier to accessing birth control, from oral contraceptives to IUDs, morning after pills, and more. And that's going to change.
Today's announcement that contraception will now be free in Canada, or will be free soon, is an extraordinary historic win for reproductive rights.
And for almost 4 million Canadians with diabetes, the steep cost of medication causes some to forego proper treatment. That could now change.
A really monumental step forward.
Laura Siren has diabetes and heads up the largest diabetes charitable organization in the country. She says the program aims to cover both drugs and devices to control diabetes.
The right medication at the right time has a huge impact on outcomes.
This motion is deemed adopted.
Birth control and diabetes are the first two drug categories to be covered under the new Universal Pharmacare Bill. The Federal Health Minister, Mark Holland, made a point of congratulating his NDP counterpart with whom he collaborated.
Today is a giant step forward for our health system. It was made possible by two adversaries asking what we have in common, rather than what separates us.
Though New Democrats are concerned, the Liberal government will get the lion's share of credit for the program.
It's happening because New Democrats fought, and we forced the government to do this.
For now, the challenge is getting the program off the ground. Alberta and Quebec already suggest they'll opt out of a national program. Holland says he's spoken with Quebec's health minister and Alberta's health minister.
That conversation leads me to believe we can find answers, we can find solutions. We want to make sure that every Canadian, and certainly every Albertan, has access to universal contraceptives and to the diabetes medication they need.
From costs that could run into the billions to how pharmacies will dispense the drugs, Ottawa says it will take a step-by-step approach, and this is just the first step. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
There are renewed calls tonight for transparency and accountability over the billions of dollars in federal spending that was doled out during the pandemic. Through access to information laws, Global News has uncovered evidence some Canadian companies were cut out of contracts and that Canadians may not have received the best price. David Aiken explains.
Global News has learned that of the $5 billion that Ottawa spent on rapid tests during the pandemic, $2 billion went to one company, BTNX, for test kits made in China, while companies selling made in Canada kits were nearly shut out. 2 years later, Ottawa still will not provide the data it has, which compares the prices of each manufacturer's test kit.
I will take you back to very difficult days when we were under extreme pressure to ensure that our country had the PPE, the rapid tests, and the vaccines to survive. And what our plan was in the Government of Canada was to diversify supply chains. So we diversified our supply chains for every product.
Jean-Yves Duclos is now the procurement minister, but during most of the pandemic, he was the health minister, and he too remembered the pressure to make quick purchasing decisions.
People weren't able to leave their homes, so we had significant needs for rapid tests, and at that time, we had not been able to procure many of them to protect Canadians in a time of crisis.
New Democrats say that's no excuse now to avoid having an inquiry about those decisions.
New Democrats believe Canadians deserve transparency and accountability on how their government handled every aspect of the pandemic. No stone should be left unturned.
Even as questions remain unanswered about 2-year-old pandemic spending, the government today tabled its spending plan for next year, 2024-2025, a plan to spend more than $449 billion. Don?
David Aiken in Ottawa tonight, thanks. Canada's Privacy Commissioner has released the findings of an investigation into the company that operates Pornhub and other adult websites. Philippe Dufresne found the company violated privacy laws because it didn't make reasonable efforts to get consent for intimate images and made removing them difficult.
The inadequate privacy protection measures on Pornhub and other ALO sites have led to devastating consequences for the complainant and other victims of non-consensual disclosure of intimate images. This must be addressed now.
Dufresne says Pornhub's parent company has ignored recommendations to obtain valid consent when dealing with highly sensitive content. He says if companies don't comply, he could take action in court. In the U.S., nearly 2 weeks after Alabama's Supreme Court ruled embryos are people, there is new protection in place for doctors who provide IVF treatment. Alabama's state legislature voted to protect doctors from criminal or civil liability if embryos are damaged or destroyed. The legislation aims to provide clarity to fertility clinics that have stopped operating since the ruling. The unprecedented decision has left patients and practitioners in Alabama scrambling. The wildfire raging across Texas is now the largest in that state's history. The Smokehouse Creek fire has burned more than 1 million acres since Monday. Dozens of homes have been destroyed. One person has died. The fire is only 3% contained, and the forecast is for a hot and windy weekend. Scaling back spending ahead, how Alberta's government says it's showing restraint in this year's budget. Alberta's finance minister has tabled the latest provincial budget. As expected, a promised tax cut has been delayed, but there will be a new tax on electric vehicles. The minister says his government is focused on what's saving for what could be a year of devastating fire and drought. Heather Yorks West was watching the budget come down in Edmonton tonight.
It is truly an honor to rise in the Assembly today and present Budget 2024.
It's a budget with an eye on saving for a rainy day, with moderate increases in spending, $2 billion for disaster relief, and $2 billion heading straight to the bank.
That brings Alberta's long-term savings account to $25 billion, an invaluable legacy that we are growing for the next generations.
But it's not what the UCP government campaigned on last spring.
This permanent billion-dollar tax cut will provide meaningful, timely tax relief to Albertans at a time when they need it most.
That tax cut won't be implemented for 2 years, and only then if conditions allow. Alberta will remain free of a provincial sales tax, but there is a new tax coming if you own an electric car. While most provinces and the federal government are offering thousands of dollars in incentives to purchase EVs, Alberta owners will be taxed $200 every year.
Since EV drivers obviously don't pay a fuel tax, this new tax will be their contribution to keep provincial roads maintained and to support other public services.
I just find that this is a government that is always keen to make anybody doing anything to reduce emissions pay more or be told they can't do it at all.
Weaning off its dependence on oil has become a central focus of this government, but we've heard this promise before. 2 years ago, Premier Jason Kenney had pledged a massive $3 billion deposit, only to have that clawed back by almost $2 billion as soon as Danielle Smith took the reins. Donna?
Heather, thanks. Next, when a promised everlasting gobstopper turns out to be a hornswoggle, the Willy Wonka event that led some parents to call the police. In Glasgow, Scotland, a Willy Wonka-themed experience was billed as a place where chocolate dreams become reality. It didn't quite turn out that way. I mean, maybe if you really use your imagination, there just wasn't much. Certainly no chocolate. Families say their kids got half a cup of lemonade and 2 jelly beans each. You can imagine how that went over. Children were left in tears. It was such a letdown. Some parents called the police. The British company behind the fiasco has no affiliation with Warner Brothers. Some of the actors hired for the event say artificial intelligence played a role in devising the chaotic script. Tickets cost about $60. The company has issued refunds to those who attended and say they won't be hosting any events for the foreseeable future. Well, the tragic end to the story of the Titan submersible made headlines around the world. It was a private mission carrying 5 people into the depths of the North Atlantic to the wreck of the Titanic. Now an audio recording of a knocking sound that gave rescuers hope has been released. Those sounds were detected by the Canadian Air Force off the coast of Newfoundland during last year's massive rescue mission. The audio has been released for a documentary about the submersible's ill-fated voyage. At the time, it was hoped those sounds came from passengers inside the submersible, but it was later determined the vessel had imploded, killing all 5 of them. We close today on our top story, the death of former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, who has passed away at the age of 84. We leave you with a look at his political life in pictures. Mulroney spent decades in public life. He's survived by his wife, Mila, and 4 children. I'm Donna Friesen. Thanks for watching.
Shock and outrage from the international community after Israeli forces opened fire on a hungry and desperate crowd in Gaza City as they were trying to get access to food. The Mass One Health Ministry says more than 100 people are dead. Chad's main opposition leader, Yahya Deo, is killed in an exchange of fire with security forces. The 49-year-old was set to stand in elections this May. His party are branding his death an assassination. French President Emmanuel Macron promises to take a dip in the River Seine one day as authorities scramble to make it swimmable by next year. That vow coming as Olympic organisers get the keys to the athletes' village ahead of this summer's games. Hello, welcome to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Yinka Eyatani. We begin with what's being described as one of the worst single tragedies to occur during the Israel-Hamas war. In Gaza City, 104 people are believed to have been killed on Thursday after Israeli forces opened fire on a large crowd as they were trying to get food aid. While US President Joe Biden, who had been hopeful for a ceasefire to be secured by Monday, says the incident is likely to complicate negotiations. Israel has denied responsibilities for the deaths, but has admitted that troops opened fire after they felt endangered by the crowd. France 24's Oliver Ferry has the details.
These images from Gaza City show the aftermath of a shooting that left over 100 people dead, the wounded brought to hospitals in the area, an incident that the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations blamed on indiscriminate gunfire from the Israeli army.
It seems that they were large in number, thousands, and then all of a sudden the Israeli army started firing at them and shooting, and according to the information that we have, dozens of them have bullets in their heads. It's not like firing in the sky to restrain people if there was confusions and chaos. It was intentionally targeting and killing.
This was Al Rashid Street, the site of the incident hours before the violence, as Gazans waited for aid trucks. The Israeli military said the shots fired were only warning shots when Palestinians approached the convoy in large numbers.
This morning, humanitarian aid made its way to the northern Gaza. There was no IDF strike on this aid. On the contrary, the IDF was conducting a humanitarian operation. That's why we were there.
The United States called the incident alarming, but stopped short of apportioning blame for it. The State Department said it showed the need to get more aid into Gaza.
This tragic event also underscores the importance of expanding and sustaining the flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza in response to the dire humanitarian situation, including through a potential temporary ceasefire as part of a hostage deal.
The NGO Human Rights Watch has accused Israel of blocking aid from getting into Gaza, while countries such as the United Arab Emirates, Egypt and Jordan have resorted to airdrops to supply aid, something the Biden administration is also reportedly considering.
Earlier we spoke to France 24's Andrew Hillier. He is in Jerusalem for us and sent us this update.
This is a classic situation in which it is almost impossible at this stage to say with certainty exactly what happened in northern Gaza. Hamas holds Israel entirely responsible for these deaths. The Israeli military, for its part, speaks of 2 incidents. It says that in the first incident, crowds of people rushed towards a convoy of humanitarian aid trucks surrounding it. It says there were chaotic scenes. It claims that the majority of people died in a stampede. It says they were crushed, trampled on, even run over by supply trucks belonging to that convoy. It then speaks of another incident a few hundred meters away in which its troops opened fire at aiming at people's legs because those people continued heading towards its soldiers, not heeding warning shots fired by those soldiers. This will inevitably push both sides further apart when it comes to ceasefire talks. Hamas has already said it may lead to the failure of those talks. Of course, earlier this week there was hope that a possible deal could be in the works even before the start of Ramadan, a deal that would have seen provisions in place for a ceasefire that may have even seen Israeli hostages exchanged for Palestinian prisoners. But in light of what has just happened, it will be inevitably harder to get both sides to sit down at the table, let alone to reach a deal.
Let's take a look at other world news now. There's been a war of words in Texas Thursday as White House hopefuls, former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden traded blame over the record-high migrant arrivals at the US-Mexico border while both on a visit there. Biden went to the border town of Brownsville where he criticized Republican lawmakers for rejecting a bipartisan effort to toughen immigration policies. Trump, for his part, was in Eagle Pass, a place that has become a hotspot for illegal crossings. There he slammed his rivals' handling of the crisis, saying there has been, quote, a Biden invasion there over the past few years. Here's Anthony Kerrigan with its story.
Vying to control the narrative on illegal immigration, former President Trump and current President Biden made simultaneous visits to the Texas towns of Eagle Pass and Brownsville along the Mexican border. President Biden called out the Republican presidential candidate for blocking his efforts to toughen up border control.
Here's what I would say to Mr. Trump. You know and I know it's the toughest, most efficient, most effective border security bill this country has ever seen. So instead of playing politics with the issue, why don't we just get together and get it done?
This after Trump told Republican lawmakers to block the bill rather than give Biden a political victory. The bill promised more border control agents, more immigration judges, and would give the president authority to temporarily close the border in emergencies. But after more than 2.4 million migrants crossed the southern US border in 2023, many fleeing poverty, Trump slammed the president's migration record.
This is a Biden invasion over the past 3 years. Now the United States is being overrun by the Biden migrant crime. It's a new form of vicious violation to our country.
In the run-up to the November 2024 presidential election, a Gallup poll published on Tuesday showed immigration has risen to top spot in voters' preoccupations. 28% of those polled called it the most important problem facing the country, up from 20% in January.
We go to Russia now, where President Vladimir Putin has warned of a real risk of nuclear war if the West escalates the conflict in Ukraine. The Russian leader striking a defiant tone during his annual speech to the nation after French President Emmanuel Macron refused to rule out sending troops to the war-torn country, an option that other European leaders have rejected. Take a listen to what Putin had to say earlier.
They're talking about the possibility of sending NATO military contingents to Ukraine, but we remember the fate of those who once sent their contingents to our country. But now, the consequences for possible interventionists will be much more tragic. We also have weapons. They know about this. As I just said, we also have a weapon that can hit targets on their territory. And they should understand that what they're doing now, trying to scare the whole world, it does risk a conflict with nuclear weapons, which means the destruction of civilization.
Well, during his speech, Putin made no mention of the recent death of one of his fiercest critics, Alexei Navalny. Preparations are underway for the opposition leader's funeral after he died suddenly in February at an Arctic penal colony where he was being held. His allies say hearse drivers are refusing to take his body from the morgue to the funeral, set to be held this Friday, after receiving threats. Navalny is finally being laid to rest after a week-long struggle by his mother to obtain the release of his body. Shifting gears now, Chad state prosecutor says Yaya Deo, a top opposition leader, has died during an exchange of fire with security forces in the country's capital. His death comes just a day after he was accused of orchestrating an attack on lawmakers and intelligence officers. Deo was the cousin of the current president and a contender in the upcoming election that electoral authorities have now organized to begin in May. Jennifer Jamin has the story.
Turmoil in Chad. State prosecutors confirmed the country's opposition leader, Yaya Dilo, was killed in a shootout with security forces on Wednesday.
This attack resulted in dozens of injuries and deaths, including the death of Mr. Yaya Dilo, president of the PSF, yesterday, 28th of February 2024. 26 people have been arrested and investigations are underway to determine the cause of these unfortunate events.
Security forces had reportedly gone to arrest a member of the Socialist Party at their headquarters in Jamena, who they accused of an assassination attempt. At that point, troops surrounded the buildings before intense fighting broke out, and Dilo was struck by the gunfire. The heavy response by law enforcement has been supported by Chad's junta-led government.
The police used their legitimate right to defend themselves and fired back at Mr. Dilo and his supporters. There were 4 deaths on our side, 3 deaths on the side of the assailants. And after this moment, Mr. Yaya Dilo succumbed to his wounds, having himself fired on law enforcement.
The ruling administration had accused Dilo of leading deadly attacks overnight on
Israeli forces gunned down Palestinians scrambling for desperately needed aid. Over 100 people are killed.
This outrageous, massacre is a testimony to the fact that as long as the Security Council is paralyzed and vetoes casted, then it is costing the Palestinian people their lives.
And the world reacts. The Palestinian ambassador asks the UN Security Council to finally call for a ceasefire. I'm Rob Matheson, and this is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Also coming up, the death toll in Israel's war on Gaza passes 30,000 Palestinians. Plus,
the United States is being overrun by the Biden migrant crime.
More agents, more officers, more judges, more equipment in order to secure our border.
Migration in the spotlight on the American campaign trail. Joe Biden and Donald Trump both make trips to the US-Mexico border. We're going to begin in Gaza, where at least 112 people have been killed in what's being described as a massacre of civilians. Hundreds of starving Palestinians have been gathering to collect food when they were attacked. Israel's army says its soldiers were forced to open fire because they felt threatened by the crowds. Michael Apple has more.
In the early hours of the morning, thousands of people flocked to Al Rashid Road, southwest of Gaza City, desperate for aid. Aerial footage released by the Israeli military shows crowds gathering around what looks like several aid trucks. By the time the sun rose, the extent of what happened was clear. The dead and the dying lying side by side, gunned down by Israeli fire.
The Israelis just opened random fire on us, as if it was a trap. Once we approached the aid trucks, the Israeli tanks and warplanes started firing on us. If this continues like this, we do not want any aid delivered at all. Every convoy coming means another massacre.
Instead of aid, they've come away with the dead. By donkey cart, car, and makeshift stretchers, the wounded are taken to nearby hospitals, all of which are overwhelmed and barely functioning.
This is exactly what we have been warning about, the hospital being out of service amid this massive influx of patients. We are operating on batteries. Most of our victims are in critical condition, which requires urgent surgical intervention, but the hospital is without operating rooms. I stand helpless. We are simply administering first aid treatment only.
The Israeli military says its forces opened fire when troops felt threatened, while a spokesperson for the Israeli government says Palestinian drivers plowed into the crowds when the trucks were overwhelmed, but neither has provided evidence. One of the survivors says bodies are still lying on the streets where they were gunned down.
As soon as the aid trucks entered, the Israelis started shelling and shooting everyone who was on the road. They opened fire randomly, killing innocent men and women in cold blood. There was gunfire, snipers shooting, tanks shelling, and drones.
Palestinians are left with few options: starve to death slowly, or risk losing their lives collecting aid. Mike Lappel, Al Jazeera.
Palestine's ambassador to the UN says Palestinians are paying the price of paralysis in the Security Council.
According to the information that we have, dozens of them have bullets in their heads. It's not like firing in the sky to restrain people if there was confusions and chaos. It was intentionally targeting and killing. And the number that we have now is 112 have been killed, and the number is increasing, and 750 injured, and possibly the number would be increasing. This outrageous, massacre is a testimony to the fact that as long as the Security Council is paralyzed and vetoes casted, then it is costing the Palestinian people their lives.
Many of the injured have been taken to Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, but only parts of it are working. Medical staff say they've been overwhelmed by the number of patients. Ismail Al-Ghul reports.
I'm now inside Al-Shifa Hospital following the massacre perpetrated by the Israeli occupation forces against innocent and starving Gazans who rushed to Al-Rashid Coastal Road believing they could get their hands on some food aid near An-Nabulsi roundabout. The entrance and corridors of the hospital are overpacked with victims. The morgue filled with dozens of dead bodies. Yet many more dead bodies remain lying on the road. The medical staff stand helpless amid this influx of victims. As we speak, more victims are still being brought to the already overwhelmed hospital. Let's listen to some eyewitnesses.
We headed to Al Rashid Road, hoping to get some flour for our children, but then the Israeli tanks advanced. They opened fire randomly on everyone on the road. Dozens were killed and hundreds injured. I simply went there hoping to get some food for my young children. We've been starving for more than 140 days. Very little aid is entering the Gaza Strip, and nothing is reaching the north.
It was the first time that I went there to wait for aid. I took a bag because we don't have flour at home. As soon as the trucks entered, Israeli tanks advanced and started shelling. I was injured.
Israeli tanks opened fire. Dozens were killed and hundreds injured. We appeal to the whole world. We cannot feed our children. Any aid delivered is soaked in our blood. May God punish those responsible.
It is known to the whole world that the north of the Gaza Strip has been starving for months. It is beyond description. This man has a family of 12. As soon as he grabbed a bag of flour, an Israeli soldier shot him in the chest. Seeing him cling to the bag of flour, the Israeli soldier shot him again on the other side of the body. He is lying here before you. The Israelis alleged to be with humanity. They showered us with bombs, missiles, and shells, open fire randomly on any moving person. They are killing and starving us.
Ongoing massacres, slaughters wreaked by the Israelis on innocent Gazans, a multitude of war crimes.
Israel's military said it opened fire on civilians after troops were approached in what it called a threatening manner. They also said a stampede was partially to blame for some of the deaths. Brandon Smith has more from occupied East Jerusalem.
Israel clearly recognises the severe pressure going to come under internationally now as a consequence of what's happened in northern Gaza. The Israeli military says that initially what had happened was the aid trucks were at Wadi Gaza. This is where Israel has created a divide between the south and the north of Gaza. The trucks had gone through this checkpoint and it was rushed by thousands of Palestinians trying to get at the food, and people were crushed or even killed by vehicles. The military said they didn't open fire at this stage, and then later the trucks moved further north. Some people approached the Israeli military. They say it was threatening in manner, and so their troops opened fire, and they opened fire on people's legs. Now the Israeli media reporting what the military is saying and also acknowledging that this could put a lot of pressure on Israel to give more concessions in any potential ceasefire talks. And Benjamin Netanyahu, in a press conference this evening, he's also said that again he's coming under a lot of international pressure generally, but he will not stop the war until Israel has achieved its objectives in Gaza. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, occupied East Jerusalem.
The UN Secretary General has condemned the killing of those seeking aid and is calling for investigations. His spokesman also reiterated his call for an immediate ceasefire. Gabriel Elizondo has more from UN headquarters in New York.
The spokesperson for the Secretary General is not calling it a massacre, instead calling it an appalling incident that needs further investigation to get to the bottom of who the perpetrators were and time for accountability. But during his noon briefing, journalists pressed him multiple times about who exactly he was condemning and why. The spokesperson would not specifically point the finger at Israel, but I questioned him why not, but they were adamant that the UN was not involved in any way in this aid delivery. Who on the ground in northern Gaza right now is delivering aid on the ground?
Not the United Nations.
Is any other country that you know of delivering aid on the ground?
We only focus on ourselves, right? So the UN is not delivering aid. I mean, we read the press reports of member states doing aid deliveries, the IDF facilitating some deliveries. We were not present at the tragedy that happened this morning.
The UN said they had to pause aid delivery to the north of Gaza because it simply became too dangerous, and the deconfliction.
Tonight, the dramatic split screen. President Biden and former President Donald Trump making dueling visits to the border. Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump separated by only about 300 miles along the Texas border, clashing over immigration, an issue dominating the 2024 campaign. The president slamming Republicans for killing a bipartisan border bill. Mr. Trump blaming the crisis on the Biden administration. Our team on the border. Also this evening, Israeli troops accused of opening fire on a crowd waiting for aid in Gaza and killing more than 100. Israel disputing that city were trampled while looting trucks. All this Gaza reaches a grim milestone, an estimated 30,000 dead. The wildfire raging in Texas, now the largest in state history. More than 1 million acres burned. We're in the fire zone. The life-threatening winter storm slamming the West Coast. Blizzard warnings in California for up to 10 feet of snow. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on the hot seat. The heated moments as House Republicans grilled him on his secret hospitalization. The cheaper choice when it comes to popular weight loss drugs, but what are the health risks? And our exclusive, NFL star DeMar Hamlin, after surviving that heart scare on the field, we're there as he surprises a teen athlete who shares a special bond.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome. The race for president still officially in its primary season leapfrogs straight into the issue at the heart of the 2024 race. The two frontrunners traveling to the southern border, making dueling appearances on what could be a defining battleground in this campaign. President Biden and former President Trump each standing in the shadow of Mexico today, separated from each other by hundreds of miles, but exchanging salvos over an issue impacting more and more American cities on the border and beyond. The president calling out House Republicans for sinking a bipartisan border bill and extending an offer to Mr. Trump saying, we can do it together. The former president blaming Mr. Biden for border chaos, calling it a Joe Biden invasion. Our Gabe Gutierrez has late details.
Facing criticism over his handling of the immigration crisis, President Biden making his second trip to the southern border while in office.
Real simple. It's time to act.
Arriving in Brownsville, Texas, blasting House Republicans for tanking a bipartisan border security bill at the urging of former President Trump.
It's the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen in this country. It's time for the speakers and some of my Republican friends in Congress who are blocking this bill to show a little spine.
The president with this message directly for Mr. Trump.
Join me, or I'll join you, in telling the Congress to pass this bipartisan border security bill. We can do it together.
Earlier, the Republican frontrunner landed about 300 miles away in Eagle Pass, Texas.
This is a Biden invasion over the past 3 years.
Arguing President Biden could end the crisis on his own, slamming what he calls Mr. Biden's lax border policies for causing it.
So we had remained in Mexico, remember that? You can't come into our country, and we had no more catch and release. Our catch and release was we released them in Mexico.
Mr. Trump pointing to recent high-profile crimes allegedly committed by migrants, including the murder of Georgia nursing student Laken Riley.
Joe Biden will never say Laken Riley's name, but we will say it, and we will remember it. We're not going to forget her.
An NBC News review of available crime data shows crime has dipped in cities that receive the most migrants.
Should President Biden have gone to a different part of the border?
I believe so. I think it probably would have been best to go somewhere that's very busy, like Arizona or California.
A record 8.6 million migrants have crossed into the U.S. since President Biden took office. The Border Patrol Union telling us Mr. Biden should not have reversed Trump border policies.
They were very effective for us as Border Patrol agents in securing the border.
An NBC News poll shows 57% of Americans say Mr. Trump can best secure the border. Just 22% say Mr. Biden will. Beyond the political split screen, desperate migrants in Mexico wait to cross. Here in Brownsville, Monica from El Salvador waits for a bus with her 3-year-old son. She tells us the journey was hard and that she spent 4 months waiting in Mexico for an appointment for an initial asylum screening through an app on her phone. Now, she's off to meet family in Houston as the border battle in Washington intensifies.
And Gabe, a win for the White House today in its legal battle with Texas regarding the border.
That's right, Lester. Today, a federal judge temporarily blocked a controversial law in Texas that would have allowed local police to arrest migrants suspected of being in the state illegally. The governor says he will appeal, and the case could eventually make its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Lester.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thank you. A deadly incident today in northern Gaza during a food distribution effort, but how it happened is in dispute tonight. This as the health ministry now puts the Gaza death toll from the war at over 30,000. Raf Sanchez has late details.
Tonight, bodies carried away on donkey carts after a deadly encounter while Palestinians gathered to receive humanitarian aid. But how it happened is in dispute. Our camera crew was there before 4 a.m. as hundreds of people came to the Gaza coast, waiting desperately for the delivery of food. Israel's military saying this drone footage was taken soon after, showing a crowd surging around aid trucks. A Palestinian eyewitness tells NBC News Israeli forces started firing at people gathering in front of a checkpoint before the trucks arrived, and kept shooting later as the crowd rushed towards the aid. The Hamas-run health ministry says more than 100 people were killed, hospitals flooded with gunshot victims. But Israel's military saying many died not from Israeli bullets, but in a stampede around the trucks, and that Israeli troops only opened fire later at a specific group threatening their position. Do you have any evidence to support your claim that this crowd posed a threat to Israeli troops?
If you approach armed soldiers in a war zone and there's a threat and they fire warning shots in the air, the best thing to do is to turn around and walk away.
And tonight, the UN warning that 1 in 4 Gazans are just a step away from famine. Musa is 6 months old, barely older than this war, but in his tiny body signs of a short life with little food. In a sense, he's lucky. Doctors say 8 other children died this week from malnutrition and dehydration, all at this one hospital. Not far away, Samia Al-Masri trying to feed her kids by frying pancakes out of barley feed meant for donkeys. Her children dodging bullets to find firewood. Words can't describe the tragedy we're living in, she says. And President Biden now says he no longer thinks a ceasefire by Monday is likely. Lester?
All right, Raph, thank you. Here at home, that massive and deadly wildfire in Texas became the biggest fire in the state's history today, burning more than 1 million acres. Our Guad Venegas is there.
Tonight, the Texas Panhandle engulfed in a deadly ring of fire as firefighters race to beat back the flames of what is now the largest wildfire in the Lone Star State's history. The Smokehouse Creek is the biggest of 4 active wildfires now ravaging the state. It's already burned through more than 1 million acres, leaving apocalyptic scenes like this in its wake. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. For Paul Blankenship, home won't ever be the same. The flames took his mother Joyce.
They had already blocked the roads off, so I wasn't able to get in there to her.
The colossal blaze is just 3% contained. Today, a surreal scene in Fridge, Texas. Freezing temperatures led to a snow flurry coating the ashes. It's a help to firefighters still extinguishing hotspots, but the weather may not stay helpful for long.
It's basically a product of low relative humidity, dry field conditions, and really, really high winds.
This was my art studio.
It's already too late for Melanie McQuitty. Her home is gone. Now she's worried about the historic hotel she manages.
I looked at my house. I said goodbye and thank you, because I knew that I was not going to return.
Until the flames subside, the hotel is putting up fire crews and evacuees. For now, the fire rages across these vast farmlands, scorching crops and forcing some farms to release their cattle to escape the blaze.
Really going to hurt all the ranchers around it. It's going to be devastating for our community.
With more high winds forecast in the coming days, this battle is far from over.
Yeah, and Guad, do firefighters have enough help, or will they have to go outside to bring in more folks?
Well, Lester, federal firefighters are on the way, and President Biden says air tankers are also coming to Texas to help fight this blaze. Now, there's been a break in the wind conditions, giving firefighters that edge, but forecasters say the heavy winds are expected to come back over the weekend. Lester?
All right, Guad, thank you. And in Northern California tonight, blizzard warnings are in effect for the Sierra Nevada mountains, with heavy snow already creating chaos on some roads. 5 to 10 feet of snow possible by Sunday, with wind gusts between 60 and 100 miles per hour. Travel will be extremely dangerous, if not impossible. In Alabama, state lawmakers passing new protections for IVF after that state Supreme Court decision that found frozen embryos are children sent shockwaves across the country. Senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett is here. Laura, this would only be a temporary fix, if you will.
Yes, Lester, lawmakers today acknowledge these bills are not a long-term solution. Instead, they're meant to shield IVF patients and doctors from prosecution and civil suits during the course of fertility treatments where embryos could be damaged or destroyed. The goal, of course, to give clinics in the state enough comfort to resume IVF procedures that have been on hold for more than a week. But the bills do not clarify whether the frozen embryos should be considered children, the crux of the state Supreme Court's ruling, potentially leaving a legal gray area. Nevertheless, the governor is expected to sign the proposed legislation as soon as next week, Lester.
All right, Laura, thank you. Just in tonight, a major turn of the case of the Air National Guardsman accused of leaking Pentagon secrets. Jack Teixeira is expected to change his plea to guilty, according to court papers. Teixeira, who was arrested last April, is accused of using his top secret clearance to access classified material and then posting it in a chat forum. A combative hearing today in Congress where Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was questioned about his recent hospitalization and failure to disclose it to the president and others for days. Courtney Cubie has more.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in the hot seat today.
It was a failure of leadership.
House Republicans grilling Austin for not telling the White House he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, underwent surgery for it, and weeks later was hospitalized with serious complications.
I find it very concerning that the Secretary could be hospitalized for 3 days without anyone else in the administration even noticing.
Either the president is that aloof, or you are irrelevant. Which one is it, Mr. Secretary?
It's either.
Democrats were more forgiving.
You want to know what accountability is? Accountability is having to come and sit in front of people and their outrage and their drama.
The Secretary emphasizing that someone was always in control.
There was never a lapse in authorities or command and control.
But acknowledging a breakdown in the notification process.
We did not handle this right, and I did not handle it right.
Although Austin took responsibility, he also said he assumed his staff would manage it.
I never directed anyone to keep my hospitalization from the White House.
On Monday, the Pentagon releasing a summary of a classified review that blamed the lack of notification in part on a lack of written guidance, but also on staff not wanting to pry into Austin's health. The review recommending new procedures. If any American worker did what you did, they would be fired. And the question still remains. Why did it take the Pentagon 3 days to tell President Biden his defense secretary was in intensive care? Courtney Cubie, NBC News, the Pentagon.
With just 1 day to go, the House passed a stopgap funding bill today to avert a partial government shutdown. The bill keeps much of the government open through next Friday and the rest open until March 22nd. Republicans and Democrats are far apart on funding decisions for major departments like the Pentagon and Homeland Security. In 60 seconds, with a new class of weight loss drugs soaring in popularity, not everyone can get them. And now more people are turning to an alternate option. But is it safe? We'll look at that next. Oprah Winfrey announced she is stepping down from the board of Weight Watchers after going public about using weight loss drugs. These medications are wildly popular, though the cost has led many to seek out cheaper, compounded versions. But are they safe? CNBC's Melissa Lee reports.
Do you want to keep the same length? For New Jersey hairstylist Kelly Fadigan, maintaining a healthy weight was never an issue until she had a child.
I had my son, and we all know after 30, things just kind of start to change.
Fadigan wanted to try Ozempic, the diabetes medication that is also shown to be effective and popular for weight loss.
But the reality was at $800 a month, it wasn't something that was sustainable for me.
When there's a nationwide shortage for a drug like Ozempic's active ingredient, semaglutide, FDA rules allow for what's known as compounding, the art of mixing and custom making medications.
I am on my way right now to get my first shot. Shut that down.
Fadigan was able to get her hands on compounded semaglutide, first from a local med spa for $300 a vial, then an online site. She loads the syringes herself.
I was just told to sanitize the top of it each time. Pull back a little bit.
Robin Bodnar is a professor at the UConn School of Pharmacy and teaches proper compounding techniques.
When there's need and there's a profit, people will get involved in compounding.
Dozens of compounding pharmacies across the country are mixing their own versions of compounded semaglutide, and while some of the facilities are inspected by the FDA, the drugs they make are not. The agency has issued warnings that compounded versions of semaglutide may carry more risk and negative side effects.
The big issues with obtaining compounded semaglutide is I don't know where these molecules are coming from. I don't know how pure they are. What else is being added?
Social media sites like TikTok are flooded with influencers plugging promotions for various compounded medications.
So you're going to use my code LAUREN50.
Our team wanted to see how easy it was to get compounded semaglutide. We tried 8 different telehealth sites that didn't require any blood work. Using our real health information, we shouldn't have been approved, and all but 2 sites did turn us down. But with one, after a quick consult with a doctor, I'm qualified. Okay, 5 questions and that's it. Great.
This nausea kind of sucks.
Kelly Fadigan has documented her experience on TikTok and is now sponsored by a telehealth company. She says she's comfortable with the choice she's made.
I feel like when you feel like you have no other options, you jump for it and do what's necessary.
For her, the reward outweighing the risk. For NBC News, Melissa Lee, New York.
And for more, watch Big Shot, the Ozempic Revolution, tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on CNBC. Up next for us, as electric cars made in China boom in popularity, the White House announces an investigation into whether they're compromising drivers' data.
Whatever you do, it's better with a website. Introducing Hostinger Website Builder, the fast and easy website builder optimized for online success. Use the AI builder for even faster site creation. Input the description of the website you want.
The Biden administration is taking a major step toward blocking smart cars made in China from roads here in the U.S., citing a possible threat to national security. We get more from Andrea Mitchell.
Tonight, the U.S. raising alarms about Chinese smart cars. Fearful Beijing could use its software to spy on American drivers.
It's like an iPhone on wheels.
Citing National Security, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo is launching an investigation into the threat.
The car knows your location, it knows your patterns, everywhere you're going, your routes. It's a huge amount of information.
Did you go so far as to ban their technology?
It depends. It depends what we learn. We can do everything.
Do you have that authority?
Yes. We can do everything from mitigating all the way to banning.
China's foreign ministry says that would overstretch the concept of national security. As China's EV sales are booming, one of its companies has now passed Tesla as the world's biggest seller. But China faces steep tariffs trying to sell in the U.S., which has it looking to Mexico.
If China can set up final assembly plants in Mexico, it can then export those vehicles to the United States for far lower costs, and that gives them equal footing in terms of the U.S. market.
Or even an advantage. Chinese car makers get government subsidies and easier access to key battery materials. That helps them sell EVs for thousands less than those made by American companies.
It's not a cover for trade sanctions and protectionism in the disguise of national security. No, this isn't that. This is national security protecting Americans.
So they know who's tracking them when they get behind the wheel. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
And next for us tonight, our exclusive, the NFL's DeMar Hamlin's tender-hearted surprise visit to a young athlete. Finally, our nightly news exclusive, the NFL's DeMar Hamlin and his surprise for a young athlete. Priscilla Thompson on the heartfelt connection they share.
Zeke Mankins had big dreams of becoming a military pilot and playing football. But around 6th grade, that all changed.
It hurt to breathe, it hurt to sleep.
The cause? A leaky heart valve that would have to be replaced with a mechanical one. What went through your minds in that moment?
I just kind of thought his world was going to come crashing down.
On Blood Thinners for Life, Zeke's football dreams were over. When they told you you weren't going to be able to play football again, what was that like for you?
Probably one of the most devastating moments of my life.
Devastated, but not defeated. Now 16, Zeke is a track star with new passions like marching band and choir, and dreams of becoming an airline pilot. His story, inspiring someone else. So how are you feeling about the surprise?
I'm feeling super excited.
Buffalo Bills safety DeMar Hamlin suffered cardiac arrest on the field last year.
I'm super proud of him of being able to shift gears and still, display your passion for other things that you love in the world. Where's Zeke?
Hamlin inviting Zeke to join Abbott's Heartmates team.
You are first pick in the draft, so there you go.
For those impacted by heart conditions.
It's just a community that we built, to allow people to know that you're not alone.
Did you experience any of that loneliness or isolation?
Yeah, I still do. Something ongoing.
A lifelong journey of healing hearts. Priscilla Thompson, NBC News, Midlothian, Texas.
What a great moment. Glad we could share it. That's nightly news for this Thursday. Thank you for watching.
Tonight, the border and dueling visits. President Biden and Donald Trump both there. Also, the flight from New York City, the emergency landing in Boston. And this new major storm, the blizzard warnings already tonight. First this evening, immigration and the border. President Biden, Donald Trump, both on the southern border tonight, arriving at nearly the same time. And President Biden's invitation to Donald Trump tonight. Mary Bruce is there. She also has breaking news tonight involving Donald Trump after the Supreme Court said it would take up Trump's immunity appeal. Tonight, Special Counsel Jack Smith and what he's now requested. The horrific scene in Gaza, what we're learning, more than 100 Palestinians killed and 700 injured amid Israeli gunfire and stampede as much needed food was arriving. What the Israeli military is now saying tonight, Tom Sufi Burridge in the region. Here in the U.S. tonight, the horrific images coming in, the fires raging, and they've now turned deadly. The Smokehouse Creek fire, now the largest in Texas history, back up and is there. The fiery moments on Capitol Hill, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin grilled about why he kept his hospital visit from the president. Arthur Raddatz reporting. Vladimir Putin's stark warning tonight to the U.S. and NATO allies about any Western troops on the ground and the risk Putin says of nuclear war. James Longman reporting. Back here at home, the deadly police shooting. What we're learning at this hour, 4 officers shot, 1 killed, several wounded. We have also learned a court officer was also killed. Authorities on the scene. New video tonight revealed of actor Alec Baldwin shown at the trial of the Rust movie armorer Ana Gutierrez. Baldwin is seen firing a gun while close to crew members, pointing it as he gives directions, and the questions now being asked in court. In New York City, the American Airlines flight that took off, then the emergency landing a short time later in Boston because of what they noticed in the cockpit. And this flight and the aborted landing in high winds. The new storm, the blizzard warnings already tonight, multiple states on alert for heavy snow and damaging winds. And the news just tonight involving college basketball sensation Caitlin Clark, who broke that scoring record, what she has now revealed.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening. It's great to have you with us here on a Thursday night. We begin tonight with those dueling visits to the southern border. President Biden and Donald Trump both there late today, just demonstrating how significant this issue is with the presidential election this November. President Biden traveling to Brownsville, Texas, urging Republicans to reconsider that bipartisan Senate border bill killed by Republicans in the House at the urging of Donald Trump. It was considered the strongest bipartisan immigration security plan in years. Donald Trump, meanwhile, in Eagle Pass on the Rio Grande River, calling it a very dangerous border, saying President Biden is to blame. President Biden with a different approach, with an invitation to Donald Trump, asking Trump to help urge Republicans to get this done. Biden arguing this is about serving the American people and addressing this issue now. Mary Bruce leading us off from Texas tonight.
Tonight, President Biden and Donald Trump touching down in Texas within an hour of each other and heading straight to the border.
Nice weather, beautiful day, but a very dangerous border. We're going to take care of it. Thank you.
President Biden briefed by Border Patrol on the banks of the Rio Grande, confronting a growing challenge for his administration and his campaign. Illegal border crossings hitting record highs, 2.2 million apprehensions in 2022, nearly 250,000 this past December alone. Just as we were standing here, a group of migrants trying to cross over using a boat to get across the river here, the Border Patrol deterring them. The president using this moment to urge Republicans to immediately pass the strongest bipartisan border security bill in years. Republicans are blocking the bill under pressure from Donald Trump, who wants to deny Biden the win so he can run on immigration himself.
We need to act. It's time for the speakers and some of my Republican friends in Congress for blocking this bill to show a little spine.
Even the conservative Border Patrol union supports the bill. Today in Texas, I asked them why. What's the biggest impact of Washington failing to pass that bill?
The security of our country.
Former President Trump urged Republicans not to pass that deal. What'd you make of that?
Well, I mean, that's politics for you. Was it a perfect bill? No, it wasn't a perfect bill. But it's better than the status quo what's going on now.
300 miles away in Eagle Pass, Donald Trump walking along the border fence.
The United States is being overrun by the Biden migrant crime. It's a new form of vicious violation to our country. It's migrant crime. We call it Biden migrant crime.
Trump is promising mass deportations if elected, but when he was in office, deportations actually dropped significantly, far below his predecessor, Barack Obama. Trump promised to build a wall stretching from one end of the border to the other. In fact, he only built about 50 new miles. Tonight, President Biden taking a much different strategy, urging the former president to put border security above politics to help solve the problem now.
Instead of telling members of Congress to block this legislation, join me, or I'll join you, in telling the Congress to pass this bipartisan border security bill. Instead of playing politics with the issue, why don't we just get together and get it done?
Here in Brownsville, the sheriff telling me they need help now. It's putting a real strain.
It is putting a real strain not only on our local law enforcement, but on our families, our school districts, our health workers. It's putting a strain on everybody.
The president is still pushing for this bill, but aware of the political reality, he is also now considering taking executive action, including tough new asylum restrictions and capping daily border crossings. President Biden, well aware that immigration is now a political liability for his campaign, is eager to show voters he's addressing the issue. David.
Border security front and center for both campaigns. Mary, while we have you, we had that breaking news last night here at the Supreme Court taking up Donald Trump's appeal over presidential immunity. That's the January 6th case. Of course, the other federal case we're tracking is the documents case at Mar-a-Lago. Donald Trump wants that trial to be moved until after the election tonight. The special counsel, Jack Smith, with his own proposed date for the trial in that case.
David, that trial was expected to start on May 20th, but there have been disputes over how to handle these classified documents at trial. Tonight, Jack Smith is now proposing a trial date of July 8th. The Trump team, though, is still pushing for this to happen after the election. There's a hearing on this tomorrow, though, where we may hear more from the judge. David.
Mary Bruce on both stories tonight. Mary, thank you.
You've got the best deals on delicious food. Order now.
Food Panda, Food Panda.
We turn now to that horrific scene in Gaza. Tonight, authorities saying more than 100 Palestinians were killed and at least 700 were injured in a stampede for much-needed food that was arriving and then Israeli gunfire. How the Israeli military is now explaining this. ABC's Tom Supi-Burge in Israel.
Tonight, the moment Israeli troops opened fire at a crowd of Gazans desperate for food near a convoy of 8 trucks. This surveillance video showing thousands of people surrounding the vital supplies moving into northern Gaza. An Israeli tank firing warning shots, attempting to disperse what they called a threatening crowd. The IDF claiming self-defense, saying they were there to support the convoy. When people who rushed the convoy got too close to the tank securing the route, they opened fire. This man says people went to get food and flour before the troops started shooting. The Hamas-run Gazan Health Ministry calling it a massacre, adding that more than 100 people were killed and more than 700 injured. Victims rushed to the nearby hospital. Israeli officials pushing back, saying tens of those who were killed were crushed by the trucks and trampled by the crowd.
We understand that a handful of people were injured, wounded, or perhaps killed in the warning shots that we fired towards people.
Can you clarify whether those people were armed that moved towards your troops?
The incident is still under investigation.
The horrific incident coming hours after the death toll from this war passed 30,000, amid the deepening desperation of millions of Gazans. Aid groups struggling to deliver supplies in the north for weeks. Today, President Biden saying the White House is considering airdropping aid.
And David, President Biden saying those horrific scenes today will complicate negotiations for a ceasefire and the release of more hostages still held in Gaza. David?
Horrifying images tonight. Tom, thank you. Back in the U.S. tonight, and the fires burning out of control in Texas. One fire, now the largest in Texas history, and it's turned deadly. Matt Gutman from the Fire Zone tonight.
Tonight, firefighters racing against time to battle the largest wildfire in Texas history, and it's only 3% contained. And now, turning deadly, 83-year-old grandmother Joyce Blankenship, a former substitute teacher, found dead in her burned home, according to family.
It's her and her husband, Jim.
Grandson Lee Quesada, overwhelmed with grief.
Wasn't able to see her for a while, and that's what hurts me most.
The Smokehouse Creek fire scorching more than 1 million acres, burning a 90-mile-wide scar across Texas, greater than the distance from New York City to Philadelphia.
Even though it's cold and it snowed overnight, firefighters are still finding hot spots like this. They're trying to put them out before the wind kicks up and it gets hot again.
Ranchers here hit hard. Sirens blaring as cattle flee the flames at this historic ranch. About 80% of the land lost.
With this cold, David, and that snow earlier, firefighters hope that the worst is behind them. That is, we're hearing stories of incredible selflessness, David. The firefighter who lived in this home made a choice to instead save the home of his neighbor, her home unscathed. David.
Just an incredible juxtaposition there, Matt. Thank you. Now to the fiery moments on Capitol Hill. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was grilled today about why he kept his hospital visit a secret, even from the president. Here's Martha Raddatz.
It was the first time the defense secretary appeared before Congress after failing to alert the White House about his prostate cancer surgery and his emergency hospitalization days later.
I did not handle it right. As you know, I've apologized, including directly to the president, and I take full responsibility.
Austin insisting there was no lapse in the chain of command, given that his deputy took control, but Republican lawmakers showed Austin no mercy.
Someone needs to be held accountable.
Congressman Jim Banks calling it an embarrassment.
Either the president is that aloof, where you are irrelevant. Which one is it, Mr. Secretary? That the president would go 3 days without knowing that the Secretary of Defense is not on the job.
It's neither. The president is not aloof.
Austin said he never told staff his absence was because of a scheduled surgery or that he was later rushed back by ambulance because of complications.
When did your staff find out you were at the hospital?
I don't know when.
You don't know when you told your staff that you were at the hospital? Are you kidding me?
But Democrats defended Austin, arguing Congress's focus needs to be passing a stalled military aid package for Ukraine.
I would challenge any member on the other side of this aisle to claim that the Secretary of Defense not fully informing the president for 3 days is somehow more important than walking away from that obligation that we have made and that the whole world is watching us on.
As for notifying the White House secretary, Austin said he never asked anyone to lie, and a Pentagon review found no ill intent by Austin or his staff for the failure to inform. But the Pentagon, David, is making changes in how to handle notifications. David?
Martha Raddatz in Washington. Thanks, Martha. From Russia tonight, Vladimir Putin giving his annual State of the Nation address, and in it, warning the U.S. and NATO allies against any idea of troops from the West in this war with Ukraine, warning of the risk of nuclear war. James Long reporting tonight. James?
David, Vladimir Putin used his annual speech to boast about Russia's nuclear weapons capability, saying his arsenal is in a state of full readiness. He warned NATO not to send forces to Ukraine, likely responding to French President Emmanuel Macron, who made comments suggesting that was a possibility. All this really threatens a conflict with the use of nuclear weapons, he said, with the destruction of civilization. The US called his rhetoric on nuclear war irresponsible. He has yet to comment on the death of his most well-known critic, Alexei Navalny, whose funeral will be held tomorrow and may attract large anti-Putin crowds. David?
Still no comments on Navalny, James. Thank you. Back here now into newly revealed video of actor Alec Baldwin tonight, shown at the trial of the armorer on that Rust movie set, armorer Hannah Gutierrez. Baldwin is seen firing a gun, pointing it as he gives directions, and the questions now being asked in that courtroom. Here's Kayla Whitworth.
Tonight, prosecutors in the trial for the armorer of Rust playing video showing Alec Baldwin firing prop guns on the set days before cinematographer Helena Hutchins was fatally shot. In one video, Baldwin firing off a gun filled with blanks, even after someone yells cut. And this video showing the actor pointing his gun toward the crew as he gives direction.
In the path of the gun, can you please move?
Armorer Hannah Gutierrez heard urging the crew to get out of the gun's path. In court today, firearms expert Brian Carpenter testifying that as armorer, Gutierrez should have corrected Baldwin's behavior every time.
Once you take on the responsibility of safety for another person, you take on the responsibility of making sure that you do what's necessary, even if it's inconvenient.
But the defense arguing Gutierrez was assigned to other duties on that set, taking her away from her job as armorer.
Ideally, would you believe there should have been 2 armors? Yes, they should have more than 1 armor in this movie.
And tonight, Assistant Director Dave Halls emotionally recalling that moment, a gun handled by Baldwin fired a live bullet, striking Hutchins.
Did you speak to Miss Hutchins when you approached her?
I did.
What did you say?
Are you all right?
Did she respond?
Yes. She said I can't feel my legs.
Last year, Halls pleaded no contest to negligent use of a deadly weapon for not checking that gun.
And David, he said he wanted to testify to make sure something like this never happens again. David?
All right, Kayla, thank you. We're also tracking breaking news coming in at this hour after a deadly police shooting in Independence, Missouri, a suburb of Kansas City. Just a short time ago, authorities revealing 4 officers were shot, 1 was killed, several wounded. Authorities also reveal a court officer was also killed while serving an eviction order. The suspect is now under arrest tonight. When we come back here, the American Airlines flight taking off from New York City, making an emergency landing in Boston just a short time later because of what they noticed in the cockpit. And then the other flight tonight, aborting its landing right in the middle of very high winds, and you'll see it in a moment here. Tonight, an American Airlines flight from New York City to Madrid was forced to divert to Boston when pilots noticed a cracked windshield in the cockpit. The plane turning around about 90 minutes into the flight, passengers landing in Boston, they had to stay overnight. The jet is now being inspected. Now, the strong winds that forced a British Airways jet to abort its landing. This was in London, the pilot fighting the winds all the way down here. The plane you can see rocking back and forth as the wheels touch the runway at the last second. The pilot then pulling back up, going around one more time, safely landing on the second attempt. Never fun. When we come back here tonight, here in the U.S., this new and major storm blizzard warnings, multiple states and on the move tonight. There's also news coming in on college basketball star Caitlin Clark, which is now revealed. To the index of other news, a major storm moving into the west, heavy snow, rain, and strong winds, watches and warnings in at least 9 states already. A blizzard warning in effect across California's Sierra Nevada mountains, up to 12 feet of snow possible. Colorado bracing tonight too as the system now moves west. And then the temperature whiplash. From Minneapolis, you see New York City temperatures back in the 50s and 60s this weekend. Tonight, Iowa college basketball star Caitlin Clark says she will enter the WNBA draft. The all-time leading women's scorer says she will finish her college career and go pro. Already projected to be the #1 pick. Very close now to breaking the all-time men's scoring record too. Her final game, season Sunday, she needs 18 points. When we come back here tonight, Made in America, the moving company on the move since right after the Civil War. The story we loved. It's Black History Month. Funny tonight here with the nation having marked Black History Month, the family business Made in America, and it turns out not long after the Civil War. Tonight we round out Black History Month with a Made in America story we can all celebrate. The oldest continuously black-owned business in the country. In Columbus, Ohio, E.E. Ward Moving and Storage, 143 years old. Founder John T. Ward started the company in 1881, just 20 years after the Civil War. Their Ohio family farm was a stop on the Underground Railroad. John and his son William using horse and buggy to help fugitive slaves escape north to freedom. During the Civil War, using their transport skills to haul supplies for the Union Army. After the war, founding their moving company, eventually named after the founder's grandson, Edgar Earl. Over the many decades, their company growing. The 1940s, the 50s, the 1970s, 80s, 90s. Headquartered in Columbus, expanding to Charlotte and Raleigh, North Carolina. 45 trucks, more than 75 employees. And right here tonight.
Hi, David.
Raleigh Head, on the job 35 years.
Hi, David.
Lindsay, 17 years.
I'm very proud of the 143-year-old history that dates back to the Underground Railroad.
Hi, David.
Jerome Davis with his moving truck.
I've been with E.E. Ward for 35 years. Driver, mover, I'm glad to be part of this legacy.
Hi, David. And new hire tonight, Najee.
I feel very fortunate to be part of such a company with rich history.
Hi, David. Brian Brooks, the current president and co-owner, along with his wife, Dominique, celebrating the legacy of this company. Eldon Earl Ward was Brian's godfather.
In this month of Black History, it's something definitely special to celebrate.
They say they're proud to continue this tradition.
John T. Ward and son William S. Ward started a company based to service customers at a high level of excellence. Really proud that we continue that. We are really proud of our team and strive to continue to service our customers as best as we can.
E.E. Ward Moving, an incredible story traced back to the Underground Railroad. Incredible. I'll see you tomorrow night. I'm David Muir from all of us here. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the News Hour tonight, death and desperation in Gaza. More than 100 people trying to pull food from an aid convoy are killed in chaos and Israeli troop fire.
President Biden and former President Trump hold dueling events at the Texas border, showcasing their conflicting immigration policies.
And women who struggle to get pregnant share their personal experiences and their view of Alabama Supreme Court ruling that jeopardizes
What is an embryo? Is it a person? Is it a clump of cells? Is it have the potential for life? All of those things are still undecided.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
The Candida Fund, committed to advancing restorative justice and meaningful work through investments in transformative leaders and ideas. More at candidafund.org. Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and the advancement of international peace and security at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the News Hour. 30,000. That's the number of Gazans the Hamas-led health ministry there says have died in just 146 days of war. That grim threshold was crossed after one of the deadliest single incidents of the war. More than 100 people reportedly killed trying desperately to pull aid from trucks.
The need is dire and hunger acute. The UN says more than 500,000 people in Gaza, that's 1 out of every 4, are, quote, one step away from famine. The White House today called the deaths in northern Gaza tragic and alarming. And President Biden says it could complicate negotiations to pause the war and release Israeli hostages. Nick Schifrin starts our coverage, and a warning: the following report includes images that are disturbing.
They went to retrieve aid. They returned instead with the dead, and the food they desperately wanted for their families now covered in their blood. It happened at 4 a.m. as Egyptian aid trucks arrived in Gaza City. The sound of gunfire on this footage aired by Al Jazeera as Gazans who'd come to gather aid began to flee. And afterward, residents walk away with bags of food surrounded by the injured. Israel released this footage of crowds that surrounded the aid and what it called tanks securing the convoy. That's when Gazans began fighting for food, said Israeli military spokesman Admiral Daniel Hagari.
The tanks that were there to secure the convoy sees the Gazans being trampled and cautiously tries to disperse the mob with a few warning shots. When the hundreds became thousands and things got out of hand, the tank commander decided to retreat. No IDF strike was conducted towards the aid convoy.
But at the Kamal Adwani hospital, where the injured were rushed in, eyewitnesses blamed Israel.
We were surprised by Israeli tanks that came out and opened fire on people randomly and directly. This is my brother who went to bring food for his children. If aid is to come to us in this way, we do not want it. We do not want to live on the blood of our children.
But the aid is desperately needed. The UN says in northern Gaza, 1 in 6 children under the age of 2 are acutely malnourished. Some don't make it. Doctors in Beit Lahia said this baby died of hunger and dehydration. A helpless mother left to grieve. To a man with an empty stomach, food is God. And for the Al-Awadea family,
What happened in 21st century?
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
For more on the humanitarian situation in Gaza, we turn to Jeremy Kanandike. He's the president of Refugees International. That's a global humanitarian organization. He previously served in the Biden administration as executive director of USAID's COVID-19 task force. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
This incident in Gaza City, as we saw in Nick's report, Israeli forces firing on a crowd of Palestinians waiting for aid. At least 100 people were killed. It's not clear how many people were killed from gunfire or in the ensuing panic. What more can you tell us about what transpired and really what contributed to it?
Well, one thing that I think is really notable here is that the traditional humanitarian organizations seem not to have been involved at all. So this did not involve the UN Relief and Works Agency or other UN bodies that are normally involved in coordinating major distributions. This seems to have been organized more by the Israeli government. It was secured, as Nick reported, by Israeli tanks. That's not typical of humanitarian distribution, and it suggests this is Israel trying to find some other ways to show that they're doing something without actually working with the humanitarian capacity that exists in the territory.
The UN says a quarter of Gaza is 1 away from famine, infants dying from starvation. Your team was just on the ground. The unspeakable devastation.
They heard just shocking stories of the damage from the war. They talked to one man who's a pediatric surgeon in the European hospital in Khan Yunis who told the story of his brother and his nephew. So his brother had a 5-year-old child with cerebral palsy who he didn't want to evacuate their home because the child didn't do well outside the house. Their house was raided by the IDF. Both of the parents were killed, and the child's older brother then had to drag him overnight to the hospital. The 5-year-old had caught shrapnel in the face. He ended up losing his eye. It's just all of these stories of incredible deprivation, incredible harm to civilians, and really, as we saw with the report today, to all appearances, really indiscriminate military action by the IDF.
And the Biden White House is considering airdropping aid into Gaza, given the dire need and the slower pace of land deliveries. You could argue that that's one solution, but not the best solution, given that, how do you get aid to 2.4 million people? Are there other viable routes to not just get aid in, but to make sure it is delivered in a fair and logical? Thanks so much for your time and for your insights this evening. We appreciate it. My pleasure.
In the day's other news, fire crews in Texas fought to gain ground on what's now the largest wildfire in the state's history. It's already burned across more than 1 million acres, an area larger than the state of Rhode Island. In the Texas Panhandle, heat have opened a crucial window for firefighters to tame the blazes. On Tuesday, another fire burned close to the nation's main nuclear weapons assembly plant near Amarillo. The site reopened after the fire shifted north. Former President Donald Trump today appealed a ruling that bars him from Illinois' presidential primary ballot. The judge found he incited insurrection, the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol. Mr. Trump's lawyer argued that, quote, staying the judgment until the Illinois appellate courts finally decide this case would reduce the great risk of voter confusion. The U.S. Supreme Court is already considering a similar case from Colorado. Congress is moving to head off a partial government shutdown this weekend. The House passed a short-term spending bill today and sent it on to the Senate. The measure funds one set of federal agencies through March 8th and another group through March 22nd. In Russia, President Vladimir Putin has renewed his warning to the West that it could risk nuclear war over Ukraine. That comes after French President Emmanuel Macron said this week that sending NATO troops to Ukraine should not be ruled out. Putin responded today in Moscow in his annual address to Parliament, painting Western leaders as reckless in their support for Kyiv.
We also have weapons that can hit targets on their territory. What they are doing now, trying to scare the whole world, it does risk a conflict with nuclear weapons, which means the destruction of civilization. Don't they understand this, or what?
The United States and other NATO members have already said they would not send forces to Ukraine. Back in this country, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin got grilled at a House hearing for letting the president and others go days without knowing he was hospitalized last month. He said there was no lapse in command structure while he was treated for complications from prostate cancer surgery. At the same time, Austin acknowledged to Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik that transparency is essential at all levels.
If a service member was in a hospital, I think the chain of command would be concerned about why they're in a hospital and make sure that they're doing the right things to take care of them and their family.
But don't you think it's their responsibility to notify their commanding officer?
I think
The answer is yes.
possible, yes. In my case, I would expect that my organization would do the right things to notify senior leaders if I am the patient in the hospital.
A Pentagon review of the incident has concluded there was no indication of ill intent or any attempt to cover up. The Biden administration will investigate smart cars made in China that could gather data on drivers and track their locations. U.S. officials warned today they pose a risk to national security. In a statement, the president said, quote, China's policies could flood our market with its vehicles. I'm not going to let that happen on my watch. And on Wall Street, stocks finished their fourth straight winning month. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 47 points to close at 38,996. The Nasdaq rose 144 points to an all-time high. The S&P 500 added 26 and also reached a record high. For the month, the Dow gained 2%, the Nasdaq surged 6%, the S&P was up 5%. Still to come on the News Hour, a Palestinian-American artist exhibit in Indiana is canceled in response to the Israel-Hamas war. A community parks advocate gives her brief but spectacular take on the power of nature, plus much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Today, President Biden and former President Trump made separate visits to two towns along the southern border as immigration becomes a key issue ahead of the November election. Laura Barone Lopez has been reporting from Brownsville, Texas on the president's trip.
In his second visit to the Texas-Mexico border, President Biden met with Border Patrol and immigration officials in Brownsville, attempting to turn the tables on his likely 2024 rival, former President Donald Trump.
Here's what I would say to Mr. Trump. Instead of telling members of Congress to block this legislation, join me, or I'll join you in telling the Congress to pass this bipartisan border security bill. We can do it together. You know and I know. It's the toughest, most efficient, most effective border security bill this country has ever seen.
Meanwhile, some 300 miles west along the Rio Grande in the town of Eagle Pass, Trump attacked Biden and again demonized migrants.
Now the United States is being overrun by the Biden migrant crime. It's a new form of vicious violation to our country. It's migrant crime. We call it Biden migrant crime.
The showdown here at the U.S.-Mexico border is set to be a defining battle of 2024, a fight guaranteed when Republicans kill the bipartisan deal designed to stem the flow of migrants and funnel billions to border security. What do you hope President Biden's trip accomplishes?
Hopefully he takes some good out of this trip, and hopefully when he meets with the Border Patrol agents, they give him an idea of what you can work from. Anytime you want something done on the front line, you need to talk to frontline workers.
Chris Cabrera is the vice.
Laura Barone Lopez on the U.S. southern border for us tonight. Laura, thank you.
Lawmakers in Alabama have quickly passed bills to protect IVF clinics and providers so treatments can resume in the state. A state Supreme Court decision last week ruled that an embryo created through in vitro fertilization should be considered a person. Since then, 3 IVF providers in Alabama have paused some services, including the University of Alabama at Birmingham Hospital, the biggest hospital system in the state. The decision is rippling across the state and sparking fears in other states of similar rulings. We spoke with a few women who were affected.
I am Danella Gilpin. I'm located in Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm 38 years old. When I heard the news about my particular clinic,
in Eagle Pass.
Laura Barone Lopez on the U.S. southern border for us tonight. Laura, thank you.
Lawmakers in Alabama have quickly passed bills to protect IVF clinics and providers so treatments can resume in the state. A state Supreme Court decision last week ruled that an embryo created through in vitro fertilization should be considered a person. Since then, 3 IVF providers in Alabama have paused some services, including the University of Alabama at Birmingham Hospital, the biggest hospital system in the state. The decision is rippling across the state and sparking fears in other states of similar rulings. We spoke with a few women who were affected.
I am Danella Gilpin. I'm located in Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm 38 years old. When I heard the news about my
association, Barbara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, a story about an exhibition you cannot see. Some arts institutions have been roiled by tensions in the ongoing war in the Middle East. And one controversy has unfolded at the Art Museum of Indiana University, where a prominent Palestinian-American artist was scheduled to have her first American retrospective this month. Jeffrey Brown reports for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
A work of art returning from an exhibition, carried up the stairs to the New York studio of its creator, Samia Calabi.
Here it is, the Queen Bee, being treated like a princess.
Back shortly.
But first, take a moment to hear from your local PBS station. It's a chance to offer your support, which helps keep programs like this one on the air.
For those staying with us, a new book is examining how innovation can lead to gains for all stratas of society, not just the elite. Economics correspondent Paul Solomon meets the author in this Encore report.
Spot the Wonder Dog, using AI to navigate tricky terrain. Already in service today at construction and manufacturing sites. And tomorrow?
Could be something that helps workers be safer, helps them be more productive, and therefore get a high wage. Or the same spot could take people's jobs. So I think it's in a balance.
In Power and Progress, economists Simon Johnson and Daron Acemoglu surveyed the history of technological progress and came to a sobering if the story comes to a close, for which I might as well use ChatGPT's conclusion.
This has been Paul Solomon, reporting for the PBS NewsHour, Act 2 in the studio.
Washington, D.C. native Akima Price is executive director of the Friends of Anacostia Park. That's a program aimed at improving the park in Southeast Washington and the lives of community members. Tonight, Price shares her brief but spectacular take on the power of nature.
Nature is going to far outlive us. I mean, that's sorry to say, but that's the truth. When I'm in Anacostia Park, I feel peace. I hear children laughing. I hear people on the basketball court. I smell cookouts. Anacostia Park is located along the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C. Anacostia is a different kind of park. It's mainly like a recreational park. It's flat. There are no monuments, but there is a skating pavilion. There is a pool. There's also a bike trail. Easily 1 million people use Anacostia Park over the course of a year. The majority of those people that use that park are African Americans, and so the park gets a lot of use in a cultural context. The Friends of Anacostia Park helps to support the National Park Service's goals around keeping the park nice, keeping the park accessible. When I was tasked with building the Friends group, I knew I didn't want to just be another organization raising funds, because we had a lot of social capital and a lot of human capital that we needed just as much as those dollars. The premise, again, is on membership, where you have no money and just donate your time, so their human capital could look like the form of helping us clean up the park. But we also need grandmas to sit at the playground and watch over, make sure people are safe. I would ultimately like to establish this park as a trauma-informed park that has, models and systems that can be replicated and shared in other places, to where it's really seen as a clinic in terms of whether you're like using a space where restorative justice circle, or you're having court-mandated mental health happen in the form of a hike instead of being in a room and called therapy. I know there are people who've shared with me that use that bike path that have gotten off their blood pressure medicine and their diabetes medicine. I've met people who are going through drug addiction, trying to get clean, and just how just being in that park, like the stillness and the silence of that park is helpful, and the fact that there are people that they can talk to. Like, that's what we're about, is not just the park, but the people. That park feels like that's my family. Like the elders feel like my grandmas, and having our staff there and seeing all these people working and bringing their kids feels like a village. If you feel like you need the healing power of nature, just step outside your door. There's birds in the sky. We just don't look up. My name is Akima Price, and this is my brief but spectacular take on the power of nature.
And that is the News Hour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amina Vaz. On behalf of the entire News Hour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS News Hour.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.